Dr. Rentschler, you wrote a report back in February 2024,
That's correct, yes, sir.
and in that report you provided a number of opinions, didn't you?
I did, yes.
Do you remember if you opined or had the opinion that the injuries on Mr. O'Keefe's arm would not result from impact with a non-damaged tail lamp cover?
I believe that's correct, yes.
And the amount of force required to fracture the tail lamp cover would result in extensive soft tissue and likely bony injury to Mr. O'Keefe's right arm.
Correct.
And so your opinion back in 2004 was that if a person's arm were to cause the damage to that tail light on that Lexus, you would expect to see extensive soft tissue and likely bony injury.
Yes, soft tissue referring to ligaments and tendons of the elbow and shoulder, correct, and the wrist.
And so you're saying not superficial abrasions, but in the arm?
Yes, when you look at, and you can see from the testing we did for this case, for this round, that the arm extends and you have contact with the arm, you would expect at those speeds damage to the tendons and the ligaments, the elbow, the shoulder, likely the wrist.
In the x-rays that we looked at, or that we saw, and you offered the words of the medical expert, there is no MRI studying any ligament damage, is there?
There are no MRIs that I'm aware of, no, sir.
And x-rays wouldn't fairly depict some of those internal injuries that you're referring to, would they?
As I described before, it can show laxity of the joint, but it normally doesn't show the actual soft tissue damage itself, no, sir.
And a crash test dummy is different than a person, isn't it?
Certainly it is, yes,
No
sir.
muscle,
That's correct.
no ligaments.
That's correct.
The crash test dummy does not react or respond like a human being.
Well, it does to a certain extent, yes.
There are differences.
Certainly there are, yes.
And so when you're looking at a crash test dummy, you can agree that there are significant differences between what you might see on the dummy's arm and what would maybe happen to a human being's arm on the inside.
There can be. That's why you have to look at the acceleration and the force, and that's primarily what the ATD is utilized for.
But focusing on the actual observation of the arm, you would agree, doctor, that looking at a crash test dummy arm is not comparable to actually looking into a human being's arm with an MRI and seeing if there's any damage on the inside.
No, of course, that they're not the same, no, sir.
You were speaking about references earlier. You did have a chance to see Dr. Welcher's report, didn't you?
I did, yes.
And in his report, there were a number of references, weren't there?
There were different references, but I think maybe 26 within his report.
In addition to his references, you were sent a number of gigabytes of information, weren't you?
I was, yes.
And in those gigabytes, there was different references to different materials, wasn't there?
Well, first of all, there were only 26 references in his report that he cited to for his opinions. There was material contained within the batch of documents that they sent over. There was a bibliography or CV of different papers that he had submitted, I think 20 pages of papers that weren't referenced in the original report. And the most recent paper in that AutoPed packet was from 2004. Most of them were from the 60s and 70s, but there was an additional packet of information.
When you read his report and saw his references, did you look up the references?
I did, yes, sir.
Okay. And when you were saying earlier that there was only one reference, you were referring to the pink test, correct?
Well, I was referring to there's only one reference specifically with respect to automobile pedestrian impacts.
When you looked at his references, sir, did you have an opportunity to read any of the articles?
I did, yes, sir.
And many of them are peer-reviewed?
Yes, sir.
In addition, when you looked at the 20 pages of materials he sent over that were not in his report, how many references did you read out of those 20 pages of references that he offered?
Well, I didn't read any because they weren't referred to in his report for his actual opinions in this case.
Do you know whether or not he considered those references or whether he read those references?
We're going to allow that.
He didn't cite to any of those references in either the PowerPoint presentation or in his report. That's the knowledge I have of whether he reviewed those.
So you don't know what he considered or thought, do you?
I know what he cited to and he referenced to in his report in PowerPoint. That's the extent.
The
yes.
question is, you don't know what he was referring or reading or relying on other than what was in his report cited, correct?
Well, right. If he referred to the other articles, yes, certainly other articles in the 60s, 70s, and 80s he may have, but they don't really pertain to what happened in this case.
How many references were in your May 7th report?
I think there were, let's see. Uh, 26, I think.
Those 26 references, are they offered in your report to suggest some type of support for the proposition that you're promoting in the report?
Well, they support the opinions or the methodology or both with respect to what I've offered in this
The
matter.
reason why you put a cite in is suggesting that it supports whatever proposition you're footnoting on that. Correct?
To some extent, or the methodology or some information pertinent to that opinion, yes, sir.
Regarding crash test dummies and prediction in soft tissue injury, you provided 3 cites, didn't you?
And soft tissue injuries?
Yes.
Can you show me where that it says that, sir?
Footnote 11 of your report, Mr. O'Keefe's right arm kinematics during impact with the Lexus are inconsistent with producing the documented cuts damage to his right sleeve as well as the abrasions to his right arm. Did you write that?
Yes, and which one was that again? I just want to make sure. What was the number?
You cited footnotes 24, 25, and 26.
Yes.
And when you cited 24, 25, 26, did any of those 3 cites, in fact, those are the only cites that you cited for that proposition, correct?
Yes, sir.
So your entire basis of cites is limited to those 3 articles or 3 papers, yes?
For reference, it's not, the testing obviously proves differently, but yes, for that one comment there, those were the 3 that were provided, yes.
Starting with number 24. When you looked at 24, did it ever suggest, in this paper, did it ever suggest that it was appropriate to use a crash test dummy in the material of a crash test dummy to make an analysis or determine whether or not there would be documented damage to someone's skin?
No, it didn't, and that's not what I did in this matter.
In this article you cite supporting the claim that you made, there is nothing in here that would suggest that a crash test dummy is appropriate to use in making that determination, is there?
There is not, no, sir.
In fact, in this article, it gives you details on what actually should be used to make that analysis, doesn't it?
No, sir. It looks at, it tells you certain ways to look at sharpness and how lacerations are caused.
This is titled Skin Tissue Cutability and its Relation to Lacerations Severity Indices. You know that. You cited that.
That's correct, and it looks at specifically, I think, laminated glass and its ability to cut the skin.
Number 24 in your site, correct?
Yes.
And it tells you 3 types of skin were examined and used for this type of study. Post-mortem human skin from 2 different body sites, Cameos leather, and Napa goat skin. Is that correct?
Right, to look specifically at laminated glass and it's the cutability of that type of glass.
And the reason why the study is giving those suggestions is because a crash test dummy's arm and fabric, the way it's made, is different than how real skin would respond. Yes?
Well, it is different, sure.
Yeah.
And I didn't do that type of comparison.
You did not do any comparisons with any of the suggestions in the site that you cited in support for your proposition, did you?
Oh, I did not evaluate that. No, not in that manner. No, sir.
And then you cited number 24 or 25. You cited a book, Forensic Pathology, correct?
Correct.
And in this forensic pathology book, in the entire book, it never suggests that crash test dummies are appropriate to use when making this type of analysis, does it?
Correct, and that's why I would not do that type of analysis with respect to lacerations. That's not what my analysis involves, sir.
My question was, nowhere in that book does it say that crash test dummies are appropriate for analyzing skin lacerations on a collision, does it?
Sure, I mean, for that sake, it doesn't say it's inappropriate either.
And then you also cited an article, your third article, Understanding the Acute Skin Injury Mechanisms Caused by Player Surface Contact During Soccer. Did you cite that?
I did, yes.
And again, there's nothing in there that talks about the use, the appropriate use of a crash test dummy when you are trying to support the proposition that someone's arm is consistent or inconsistent with producing cuts and damage in a collision.
That's correct.
Are you aware of literature relative specifically to the use of the hybrid 3 crash test dummy which was used in this case?
There's a lot of literature with respect to the hybrid dummy, yes.
Have you ever heard of the person by the name of Stanley Bakatis?
I don't recall that I have.
Okay. How about Harold Mertz? Isn't he a leader in the field with crash test dummies?
He is, yes.
Right. Would you agree that we also do not believe the current instrumented arm configuration is suitable either for prediction of soft tissue injuries? Would you agree with that?
Well, for laceration, sure, it shouldn't be used for that. It shouldn't be used in that manner. That's why I don't use it in that manner.
Do you have any source that says it's suitable for determining superficial abrasions?
I do not, no, sir.
You have no other sites whatsoever supporting that proposition, which led inevitably to one of the opinions you gave to this jury, true?
Not true. That's a misrepresentation of what I performed, the testing that I performed, and the results that I analyzed in this case.
Now, you've talked a lot about Dr. Welcher's pain test. You don't have any information that Dr. Welcher ever claimed that his test was intended to represent exactly how Mr. O'Keefe's arm was when he was hit, do you?
Well, the evidence I have for that is that in his report he says that the orientation and position of the lacerations are consistent with the orientation position of the taillight cover, and then right under that he has reference to that test that he performed. So again, if he didn't intend to do that, then there's no evidence that he can provide with respect to the arm impact at all. That's the only test that was performed to look at the arm and the taillight cover. If it doesn't represent the actual position, then apparently he has no idea how the arm was positioned or how it was impacted.
Let's get back to my question.
Yes.
Is there anything where Dr. Welcher has informed you or written that he is intending to represent the actual arm angle of John O'Keefe when he was hit by Alexis?
Again, I just described what he has in his actual report. So he didn't write specifically that that's what it's intended to do. It seems he's inferred that, and again, that's the only test that he's performed or referred to in this case.
You inferred that?
Inferred that that's how he believes that the arm was positioned?
I think we understand your perspective is that the only test he performed, but what I really want to get at is your conclusion, your assumption that Dr. Welcher was suggesting that there was a specific arm angle that occurred in this case that he was identifying. You don't see that anywhere in his report.
Well, it would be pretty odd if the one test he ran didn't actually represent what he thought happened. I don't understand what the value of that would actually be.
Did Dr. Welcher ever represent that he was trying to describe the actual body position of John O'Keefe when he was hit?
Actually, he doesn't state that. He states very little in his report or in his PowerPoint. He demonstrates through the video of his arm like that and contacting it, and then he holds his arm up to a picture of Mr. O'Keefe's right arm to compare and apparently demonstrate that it's in the same area. But again, he doesn't actually state that opinion. He doesn't state any opinions that the contact actually occurred, except in one point, and has no evidence or foundation for that.
Would the answer to my question be no?
You would have to ask Dr. Welcher, I suppose, but if it's not, again, then I'm not sure what that test actually accomplished or represented.
you've made assumptions and then have given opinions to this jury based on your assumptions, haven't you?
I've evaluated the evidence in the one test he ran. If that's incorrect, well, then I would have to correct my opinion and my assumption and say that not only is the test not actually show what occurred, but he hasn't performed anything to actually link the arm contact to the taillight cover. If it doesn't represent that, you're right, I'd change my opinion that there's no evidence, no analysis, no conclusion whatsoever.
I'm going to try to make my question a little clearer. Is there anything in the report where Dr. Welcher has stated that the arm angle in the demonstration was in any way attempt to replicate exactly how John O'Keefe's arm was when he was struck by Alexis?
I don't believe anything's written in the report with respect to that, no.
Is there anything in the report, Dr. Rentschler, anything, that states Dr. Welcher was stating or claiming that he knew the body position of John O'Keefe when he was struck?
Objection.
I'm going to allow that.
So no, I guess there is no opinion or conclusion that he knows how Mr. O'Keefe was actually positioned at the time of this alleged incident.
Do
You're
you
correct.
know whether Dr. Welcher has been clear that he does not know? Let me say this a different way. You would agree, Dr. Welcher has never stated in his report that he can identify the speed at which Mr. O'Keefe was struck in a collision.
He does not state what he thinks the speed is. That's correct.
He never states how far, if at all, Mr. O'Keefe was thrown after being in a collision.
That's right. He does not.
When you don't know the speed, you don't know the body position, and you don't know the angle of the body at the time of collision, you cannot replicate a collision with crash test dummies to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty. can you?
Well, you're right. You can't prove that that actually occurred. That's the basis. Yeah.
So,
If you don't have the
You can-
information, you can't replicate what happened. You can't determine, you can't state to any conclusion of accuracy what actually occurred if you don't have the evidence.
so if you were to do a crash reenactment, but couldn't state to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty this replicated the actual collision, that wouldn't be scientifically reliable to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, would it?
Well, if you perform a test and you state this is what I tested and this is the angle, then you can certainly say these are my conclusions. But if you don't know the throw distance, if you don't know the position, then you're correct. You can't actually come to a conclusion that it didn't occur. If you don't know how something occurred, how can you conclude that it actually occurred? It scientifically makes no sense.
So, if an expert does a crash test and they can't determine to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty that it replicates the actual collision, you would agree that would not be a reliable test to present to a jury, don't you?
Objection, Your Honor.
I'm going to,
Let me approach that again.
very briefly.
in reading the reports and evaluating the PowerPoint, would you agree there is no statement by Dr. Welcher ever in anything that you reviewed that he is claiming or stating that his paint test was supposed to be a reenactment, identifying the details of how Mr. O'Keefe was standing, moving, or holding his arm at the time of a collision?
He did not state that. That's correct.
So when you've made your criticisms that you've done testing regarding Dr. Welcher, you don't have any evidence, any statement by him that he was trying to reenact the actual collision?
When I did that, there was one test with the arm like this. That's the only evidence that was presented in his opinion or in his case. I evaluated that. I have not seen any other explanation of what happened or how it occurred. Specifically, Dr. Welcher said in his report on page 9, he said, "I have conducted an accident reconstruction and biomechanical engineering analysis of this matter." If he did not recreate how he was positioned, if he did not determine the speed of impact, if he did not determine how Mr. O'Keefe's body moved, if he did not determine where he ended up, then he did not conduct either an accident reconstruction analysis or a biomechanical causation analysis. He did nothing of the sort.
Other than your opinion, let's get back to my question if I could.
I believe I answered at the beginning of that, sir.
I'm going to ask you again. My detailed question is, there is nothing in Dr. Welcher's report or any of his presentation that states he is trying to represent the exact posture, movement, and stance of Mr. O'Keefe when there was a collision. It's not anywhere in there where he stated that, is it?
It's not stated. I'd be curious to find out what that, if that wasn't the intent of the test, I'd be curious to see what the actual intent was.
Is the answer no, it's not in there?
I think I just said that at the beginning of my answer, sir.
I'm going to ask you again, is the answer no?
The answer is no.
When you do crash tests, you have a controlled environment in some respects, don't you?
You do, yes, sir.
You get to control some or sometimes many of the variables, don't you?
You can, yes.
Real life sometimes is described in your world as chaos, right?
I suppose it could be under certain circumstances.
Testing is limited to the variables that you produce, but real life sometimes has variables you can't predict. Isn't that fair to say?
It's possible, yes.
Is it more than possible, doctor?
I don't know, is it?
What I'm asking you.
It depends on the situation and the certain variables. It depends on the case. It could be possible, yes.
Have you seen cases where variables are impossible to predict?
Where the what?
Variables. Have you had cases? You've had many cases, you said. Have you had cases where variables are impossible to predict?
It depends. I mean, it depends on what you're looking at. And if you want to conclude that something happened and this is how it occurred, you have to look at those variables. If you can't control for those variables, then it's possible you can't prove that it actually happened. So yes, if you're doing a certain test to prove something, you have to look at how those variables may affect it. But there's basic information you have to know to perform that type of an analysis.
So my question again is, are there scenarios where variables are impossible to predict?
There could be, yes.
Have you had cases yourself where there are variables that were impossible to predict?
I suppose I probably have. I mean, it depends. If you don't know what happened, sure, then you don't know those variables necessarily.
How many cases have you done on pedestrian accidents?
Done hundreds of cases.
So you have a good background and basis to know whether or not there are variables that sometimes you can't predict, don't you?
Sure. As I said, it depends on the case.
When you did the crash tests in this case, did you actually do them?
I did not, no.
Were you even there when they happened?
I was not, no, sir.
So you're relying, in part, on Dr. Wolf's work.
I am, yes.
If Dr. Wolf made mistakes, would that affect your conclusions?
It depends what mistakes they are.
When you had, or when Dr. Wolf had the crash test dummy in test E and F on a forklift, you remember those?
I do, yes.
When it's on the forklift, it does not allow the crash test dummy after being struck to move, to be thrown, does it?
Actually, if it's a force acting on it, it will move. It will like a pendulum. So if there's a force acting on it, you'll see which direction it moves. If there's a forward force, it will move. It'll swing forward or sideways or backwards. It can move.
Well, my question isn't direction. It's can it show the throw? Can it throw or move the crash test dummy in its natural course after the collision to a resting spot?
No. In those tests, though, there wouldn't be any throw.
If a crash test dummy is restrained by a forklift, if a crash test dummy is restrained by a forklift, it does not allow the crash test dummy to be thrown, does it?
Assuming there is throw, that's correct. It doesn't.
It doesn't allow an observation of the crash test dummy to turn or fall, does it?
No, it does not. Well, no, actually, it turns, sure. I mean, it can spin.
How about fall?
No. And a crash test dummy would just fall down anyway.
Have you seen crash test dummies where it is held in place electromagnetically, and when the collision happens, then the dummy can move? Have you seen that?
I have, yes.
Have you seen, excuse me, have you seen crash test with crash test dummy where there is a light, I'm sorry. Have you seen crash tests with crash test dummies where there is a light string and somebody cuts the string moments before the impact or a second before the impact?
I have, yes.
That wasn't done in this case, was it?
What? It wasn't. It wasn't necessary.
Was that done in this case?
It wasn't. I'll speak slower and a little clearer.
Maybe if you answer my question.
I just did answer it. I said it wasn't.
When the crash test dummy is held by a forklift and the car hits it, it doesn't replicate the drag that the car will have on the crash test dummy as it would a real person, does it?
You can see if there's any drag because it's on like a pendulum. So if there's any drag pushing it forward, it's going to sway that way. It's going to move the dummy. It's not going to move at the distance that it actually would. If there was any distance, it would move it. But you can actually see the motion, and you can see in the testing, the 24-mile-an-hour testing, there was no motion, which is not unexpected for that type of a test.
There is a difference between a crash on center of mass and a fender vault, isn't there?
There is, yes.
A fender vault is a different type of collision than a center of mass collision. Isn't that true?
That's correct.
It is impossible to replicate all of the different scenarios with a crash test dummy on a fender vault collision, isn't it?
I mean, it depends on what you're trying to replicate, and it depends looking at the injuries or how someone was positioned. So if you know how they were positioned, you can try and replicate that, yes.
Could I have 59 of Dr. Rentschler's PowerPoint, please? In your PowerPoint, you cited an article, Vehicle-Pedestrian Collisions, Validated Models for Pedestrian Impact and Projection, correct?
Yes.
And you put snippets up on the board?
Yes.
Okay. And these snippets talk about an engagement with the pedestrian in the vehicle?
Correct.
Is there a reason why you took out a piece of that article that falls between those two paragraphs?
No, I don't think so, no. Those are the most relevant parts.
Did you cut out the part that says some frontal collisions are with the corner of the vehicle where the pedestrian is deflected to one side without secondary impact of the upper body with the vehicle front? Alternatively, the transverse velocity of the pedestrian at impact may be sufficient to prevent head contact as the body rotates sideways off the bonnet, and these situations are known as fender vault. The models presented here do not apply to fender vault. Did you leave that part out purposely?
Oh, yeah, I did, sir, because this isn't a frontal impact with a sedan over the fender of the hood of a sedan. This is with the back of an SUV, so it's completely different.
You've cited many, many sources where it talks about front-end collisions because that is the majority of pedestrian collisions in the front end, isn't it?
The majority, it is, yes, sir.
And so there is a difference between fender valves and a center of mass collision, isn't there?
That's correct, and that's why you see a center of mass, you look at the testing we did, that's a center of mass impact. On a frontal impact, usually, if you're hit by the front of a car, it doesn't usually get your center of mass, you're too tall. That's why you do a fender vault, or you flip onto the hood, or you flip over the top of the car. So yeah, it's completely different. It doesn't pertain to allegedly what occurred in this case.
So let me get back to my question. When the tests were done, E and F was a center of mass collision at 29 miles per hour, wasn't it?
That's correct, yes.
Right. E, are you considering E a center of mass collision?
Which was he, the
24 miles per hour.
No,
Good
it didn't hit the center of mass of the
Right.
dummy, it just hit the arm.
Exactly. So there is a difference. In this case, you don't know the position of Mr. O'Keefe's arm at impact, do you?
Nobody knows. I don't think his arm was even impacted by the car, so no. I don't know the position of the arm at impact because it wasn't hit by the car.
You don't know the angle of his body at impact, do you?
The alleged angle,
So ask the question again.
Okay. You have no information about the angle of Mr. O'Keefe's body at the time the defendant's Lexus was traveling backwards on January 29, 2022, do you?
we have no information that he was even hit by the Lexus. So there wouldn't be any information on the angle if his body wasn't hit.
When you talked about force equations with this jury, you cited a number of pieces of literature, didn't you?
I did, yes.
And when you cited the literature, you cited all literature regarding concentrated forces, didn't you?
No, that's not true.
There's a difference between concentrated and distributed force, isn't there?
Yeah, I talked about that on my direct, yes, sir.
When you showed your slides, for example, the hand,
Yes.
could we see slide 8, please? Okay. Let's try slide 56. You would agree with me, Doctor, there's a difference between a concentrated and a distributed load, wouldn't you?
I would, yes.
When you gave your opinions in this case, it was based on concentrated load, wasn't it?
No, sir.
When you gave your force equations, was that distributed load or concentrated load?
That was the load at the center of mass. And so you can evaluate that on a distributed load. You look at acceleration and you look at bending moment. So you can do both.
When you gave your charts and numbers, was that based on concentrated or distributed load?
No, that was based on the distributed load with respect to the center of mass of that arm and where the accelerometer was.
But this was not a center of mass impact.
We're assuming center of mass is the most dispersed impact. So if we want concentrated, then we look at a focal point, and you can do that with the hand.
So
But center of mass, acceleration, and distributed across the entire arm, that's where it's the least amount of pressure, if we're talking about force over area. And that's what I evaluated in this case.
When you gave your demonstration about the hand with the different hexagons on it, do you remember that?
I do, yes, sir.
Okay. There's a difference between taking a small object and putting pressure on the body as opposed to a larger, wider object, isn't there?
Well, it depends on what it's contacting. And certainly not a difference when you look at the size of that impactor and the size of the knuckles and the metacarpal bones.
So, for example, if somebody took a book and hit somebody off the forehead, it may or may not leave a mark. But if they use the same force and they took a high heel, the heel of a high heel, and hit somebody, there would likely be more damage with the high heel than there would with the book. Isn't that fair to say?
Well, soft tissue, but if the force is the same, you would expect the fracture to occur. You have to look at the distribution, you have to look at the strength of the bone, and you have to look at the overall force that's being applied.
Now, you said in your differential diagnosis you considered all evidence. Did you say that on direct examination?
I don't believe I did. I believe I considered evidence for a biomechanical and accident reconstruction analysis in this case.
So you didn't consider phone data.
Has nothing to do with biomechanics or accident reconstruction.
Did you consider text stream data?
Objection.
I'm going to allow that.
I'll strike it. Did you consider Apple Healthcare data?
No, sir.
Objection.
I'm going to allow it.
Did you consider phone temperature, battery temperature data?
Objection.
I'm going to allow it.
Has nothing to do with biomechanics, sir.
I'll ask again. Did you consider it?
I did not, no.
You said it would be improper to ignore evidence. Were those your words?
For a biomechanical analysis, yes, sir.
Have you been to the scene of an accident before or a collision?
I have, yes.
Do you know what a debris field is?
Yes, sir.
And you've seen in your videos E and F, there's debris fields after the collision and the taillight brakes, isn't there?
So first of all, there's debris in the yard. What that's from, is there a collision? Was there a collision? Where did that come from? Where it was positioned? That's all conjecture and supposition. Those aren't actual facts, sir.
Can you hear my question about debris field? I'm asking you.
Yeah, and I think it's in a...
Excuse me, sir. In a collision, have you seen debris fields?
I have, yes.
Have you seen debris fields where a taillight is shattered?
I have, yes.
In fact, in your video, yes or no, after the collisions, in video E and F, there are debris fields, aren't there?
There are at a certain point, yes, sir, absolutely.
And so when you're looking at your studies, do you consider debris fields?
It depends on the evidence. It depends on how it was collected. It depends if it is accurate or reliable. But from a biomechanical standpoint, no. You don't need to look at the debris field or alleged debris field of a taillight cover. It has nothing to do with the injuries or the position or the movement of
Could I
an
have Exhibit
individual.
73, please? Do you see that, sir?
I do.
Do you know what that is?
Looks like possibly part of the taillight cover.
Right. Is that an alleged part of a taillight cover, or do you think that's part of a taillight cover, sir?
I don't know specifically. It might be part of the actual taillight cover.
Well, when you studied this case and you looked at all the evidence and all these different things, did you look at these photos and see that alleged piece of taillight shard recovered from the front yard area of 34 Fairview Road? Did you consider that?
Well, I don't. Was that part of the one that was recovered by a leaf blower or not?
When you were doing your ample study, sir,
Yes.
what I'm asking you is, when you were looking at all the available evidence, did you look at this photo of this alleged taillight shard on the front lawn of 34 Fairview Road? Were you aware of this?
No. Oh, I was aware that there was debris in the yard, but again, that has nothing to do with the biomechanical analysis. If you can't prove that the impact happened, then everything after that doesn't actually matter, does it? Because all of that would be from something else. So unless you prove the core issue at this case, the contact, the post-impact movement, the head injury, without proving that, everything else is ancillary to what you're attempting to conclude.
Do you have any evidence in your biomechanical studies how this alleged piece of taillight shard ended up on the front lawn of 34 Fairview?
I don't know, sir. I didn't evaluate or investigate that.
Could I have Exhibit 76A, please? Did you see this photograph, sir?
I do, yes.
Is that part of a red taillight shard or an alleged piece of a taillight shard?
It looks like it, yes.
Did you consider this in your biomechanical studies, that this taillight shard was found in front of 34 Fairview Road?
Was found. Can you give me a precise distance from where the body was found and where that was found with respect to Mr. O'Keefe, with respect to a reference point?
Did you consider this, sir?
There is none, so no, I did not consider that.
Do you know how this taillight shard got there?
How it got there?
Yes.
That wasn't part of my analysis. There are certainly different possibilities of how that actually occurred.
Exhibit 99D. Do you know what that is, sir?
It looks like part of the light assembly.
Mr. O'Keefe's hat?
Oh,
Did you
that's
look at
his
this
hat.
photograph?
I see now, yes.
Did you know he was wearing a hat that night?
I did, yes.
And did you consider how that hat ended up on the ground in front of 34 Fairview?
No, sir, that was not part of my biomechanical analysis. There's a number of ways a hat can end up in a yard.
Right. Is one of those ways being in a collision with a Lexus?
I suppose that's a possibility, or someone could put it there. I mean, there's a number of different possibilities as to when or how a hat may appear in a yard.
Who do you think put it there?
Well, I have no idea. I haven't seen any evidence of how it got there, and frankly, it's immaterial to a biomechanical analysis.
Do you have a theory you want to share with us about planting evidence? Is that where we're getting at, sir?
Sustained.
By the way, the x-rays you looked at earlier, when's the first time you saw those?
I saw those when I was on the case initially for the first trial.
No mention in your report about reviewing those.
It says I reviewed medical records and reports. That's how I actually word in every report I have. I just put generally that it refers to medical records and reports, which includes x-rays, MRIs.
Exhibit 74, please. Have you seen this photograph?
I have, yes.
Okay. In your studies or your testing, did you determine how Mr. O'Keefe's shoe ended up near the curb?
No, sir.
Exhibit 201A, please. Have you seen this photograph before?
I don't know that I have.
Have you ever seen any container that had tail light shards that matched the defendant's Lexus that were removed from his sweatshirt and his shirt? Have you ever seen any container holding those?
I haven't. Well, I believe there was evidence collected like that, but yes.
Okay. Could we have 201E, please? Have you seen this photo?
I believe I have seen that, yes.
Do you understand those are taillight shards matching the defendant's Lexus, the broken taillight,
Yes.
that were recovered from Mr. O'Keefe's sweater or shirt?
Objection.
I'm going to allow that. Did you consider that?
Your Honor, if you could reformat it. Otherwise, I need to see the photos.
I'll try. I'd rather try to reformat it than come
Okay.
sidebar. Did you know that taillight shards were collected after Mr. O'Keefe's sweatshirt and T-shirt was scraped?
Objection.
I'm going to allow that.
Your Honor, I need to see the photos.
Jurors, this will be brief.
In your extensive study of the detail of this case, did you know that these pieces of plastic were removed or scraped from Mr. O'Keefe's clothes, specifically his sweatshirt and his T-shirt? Did you know that?
I was aware that samples were recovered, yes.
Were you aware that these samples were consistent with the broken taillight of Miss Reed's Lexus? Did you know that?
Yes.
Did you do any analysis how these broken taillight shards got into Mr. O'Keefe's clothes?
No, I did not. The first step involved with that would be to actually perform a biomechanical analysis, to look at the movement of the body, how the body was positioned, where it ended up. So without that knowledge, you can't determine exactly how or if those types of shards were deposited there as the result of an actual impact.
Your Honor, based on the last question, I wonder if the doctor finished his question. The judge can move to strike based on the question that was asked. For the same reason I just indicated at the sidebar. You just be reformatted and strike.
I'll try again.
Okay.
When you looked at these taillight shards that were
Objection. That's the problem.
Go ahead, Mr. Brennan.
when you looked at these taillight shards that were consistent with the break in Miss Reed's Lexus, did you consider how they got into Mr. O'Keefe's clothes?
Objection. Same objection.
I understand the objection. Word it differently. Start with the different.
Yes, Your Honor. You see these pieces of broken plastic, don't you?
I do.
And you understand that these were found in the scrapings of Mr. O'Keefe's clothes.
I do.
And you understand that these broken pieces of plastic are consistent with the taillight of Miss Reed's Lexus.
I do, yes.
In your studies and reenactments, did you make any determination how these pieces of broken plastic got into Mr. O'Keefe's clothing?
No, when you look at those studies, first you have to know how the incident occurred. Then you can look at that and determine, if you want to, how that may have occurred. Because otherwise, there's, again, different ways, different manners in which that may have been deposited on the sweatshirt. Without knowing how this happened, you can't just then look at other evidence and try and predict how it happened. You need the actual evidence to look at the event. This all goes to the event. You need contact with the arm, I guess apparently, to actually cause this incident to occur. And without that evidence of any of that happening, knowing how the body moved, knowing how it was hit, knowing where it ended up, any conclusions drawn off of information like this is just supposition, because you don't know the movement of the body or the vehicle. It's putting the cart before the horse.
Could I have Exhibit 201D, please? Do you understand this is broken pieces of plastic consistent with the broken taillight of the defendant's car? Do you understand that?
I believe so, yes.
And do you understand this is a photograph of these broken pieces of plastic under a microscope?
Okay.
Well, I'm asking you, do you understand
Well, if
that?
that's what you're
I don't,
telling me, then
I don't want you to rely on me. If you didn't see them, it's okay.
I don't recall if I saw those or not.
Have you seen this picture?
I don't recall seeing it, no.
Now looking at this photograph and seeing these broken pieces of plastic under a microscope with fibers near the plastic, is that something you would want to have considered in your analysis, forming your opinion whether or not there was a collision between Ms. Reed's car and Mr. O'Keefe?
Again, if you can't do a proper biomechanical analysis, then that evidence is not consistent. You can't determine how it occurred. You can't say that that's consistent with it. You can't just look at certain evidence and not do a proper analysis. If you can't even tell that an impact occurred, you can't look at tertiary evidence and say, well, this proves that it occurred. In order to say from a biomechanical and accident reconstruction standpoint that an impact occurred and here's how it occurred, you have to understand the mechanics and dynamics before it. This could certainly support that finding and those conclusions, but by itself, I don't know of any methodology in any study or peer-reviewed article that says you can just look at alleged evidence and then form an opinion as to whether an impact occurred.
Can you see with your eye that parts of those broken pieces of plastic are sharp?
They look sharp.
Do you disagree? Do you think they're not sharp?
Well, I don't have an opinion as to that, sir.
We'll take a look.
Objection.
Sustain.
If you look at that for me kindly, can you tell me whether you think those pieces of broken plastic are sharp?
Objection.
I would allow that.
I guess they look sharp. I have no idea if they are or not. It's under a microscope. When you actually put things under a microscope, it looks much different, and it is much different than
Okay, let's go back
Been
to
looking at the normal eye.
20E. Perhaps that can help. Not under a microscope. If you pay particular attention to the larger one in the middle, that looks like a shark's tooth. Do you see
Yes.
that one?
yes.
Do you think, doctor, that some of those appear sharp?
Some of those appear sharp, could possibly cause a laceration, sure, as opposed to an abrasion.
Do you think that any of those could cause an abrasion?
I don't think that you could get a consistent level of superficial abrasions along the entire arm of minimal depth of less than 0.5 millimeter through impact with the glass. To have that minimal force on every part of the arm to only cause superficial abrasions would be highly unlikely.
Do you think some of those sharp pieces, if they were lodged in Mr. O'Keefe's sweater, could cause an abrasion?
It's possible if you had enough punctures and holes in the sweater to correspond with the abrasions on the arm. That would be, I suppose, that could be a possibility.
In your testing, not to belabor it, I'm just going to show you one. I want to show you video E. Could we go to video E, please? Stop. In video E, the arm that is sticking straight out, who determined that angle, Dr. Wolf?
Yes, well, we positioned it so it would impact in the general area of what was shown in Dr. Welcher's paint test study, which apparently is irrelevant and doesn't show the alleged position of how the arm was at impact. But yes, we positioned it in that manner.
When you say we, did you have input on the positioning of that, or did Dr. Wolf do it?
Well, I had input into how we were going to position it. It would probably be both of us, I would say.
So you and Dr. Wolf chose to position the arm straight out, correct?
In that test, we did, yes.
Is there a glass in Randy's hand?
There is not, no.
A drinking glass, no?
No.
In any of your studies, did you have a drinking glass in Randy's hand?
We did not have a drinking glass in the dummy's hand, no.
And you see when the taillight is shattering, those red things falling down. What are those?
Those are part of the taillight.
Continue a little bit, please. Stop. Did you count how many taillight pieces broke?
We didn't count the taillight pieces. We counted how many punctures or holes there were in the sweatshirt, which was 0.
If you had done this test and changed the arm angle, do you expect the damage would look different as far as the breaks in that taillight?
Well, we conducted a number of tests. It may look somewhat different, sure.
If you conducted this test and moved the arm angle, not another test, this
Yeah.
test, but you moved the arm angle, do you expect that the break would look different?
That the break would look different?
Yes.
It could look a little different. I mean, certainly the breaks looked a little different in the test, but they were comparable to each other.
You do not know how John O'Keefe was standing that night, do you?
Well,
Objection. Seems fast.
No, I'm going to allow that.
You do not
He
know
was
how
standing
John
up.
O'Keefe was standing that night, do you?
If he was standing, if the impact occurred, then no, nobody knows how he would have been standing.
You would not know what his arm angle was, would you?
No.
You would not know the exact speed of any vehicle that hit him that night, would you?
Objection.
Sustained.
The debris, the broken taillight, is that traveling in a consistent or a different direction?
What do you mean consistent or
Is
different?
it all going in the same direction, or is it going in different directions?
No, there's some spread to the debris.
So the pieces don't all fall right in a pile with each other, do they?
They do not, no.
Continue, please. Stop. Do the majority of the pieces land on Randy?
No, they do not.
And so as they fall, if Randy were to fall, many of those pieces would not be among the immediate area of his body, would they?
If the dummy fell right there, no, they would not be.
Now, the dummy can't fall because the dummy is on a forklift, correct?
It's suspended like a pendulum, correct?
And you see in your test that the tail light, at what you say is 24 miles per hour, can be broken without the dummy's knees touching the vehicle. Isn't that fair to say?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. You can't tell the full movement and fall of this dummy the way you've set up this test, can you?
Well, knowing the physics, you can certainly determine or estimate where it would be, but no, you could release it and it would fall primarily straight down. It would twist and it would fall down.
Is there something that could affect the dummy if you let it fall? Is there something that could affect its movement after being hit?
Like what?
Like, could its feet be twisted and then hit another object like a curb?
Well, there's going to be very little lateral movement of its feet, but even if it did, then it's still going to fall over right where it is.
Can you continue, please? Can you see the feet, doctor?
Yes,
Are they twisting?
they are, yes.
Is that because of the rotation of Randy after he struck?
Yeah, that's the rotation of Randy. And again, yeah, as you said, that's not a normal person because there's no normal force acting on the dummy. We just have it barely touching. So a normal individual, you aren't going to twist to that extent because this is a dummy which is suspended with just a little contact on the
And
ground.
after being contacted by a vehicle enough to break the light, could it cause a person to stagger backwards?
I mean, you're making some suppositions here. There's no evidence that that would occur in this case, and not if you're spinning like that. You're not going to stagger backwards. First, you're going to spin if you get hit with your arm, as I described in my direct. But is it possible? I can't say it's impossible, but there's no evidence of that.
Could a person stumble backwards after being hit?
Objection.
I'm going to allow that.
What do you mean by backwards? Because you'd be spinning. So what direction is backwards?
Could a person get their foot caught on a curb, and sneaker come off, and then stagger backwards and fall on their head?
Objection, Your Honor. Yeah, let's go.
I'm going to allow that.
Doctor?
Can you answer that?
I mean, I guess you could somehow predict or have a possibility of almost anything happening. You could say someone could get hit by a car and do a couple of somersaults into the yard. I mean, there's no evidence of that. So it's just supposition, but I won't say it's impossible.
You think John O'Keefe did somersaults in the front yard of 34 Fairhaven? Is that what you're telling us, Doctor?
No, I don't think he even got hit by the car, sir.
That's not what I'm asking. I've heard that. I'm asking you,
Yeah.
he did somersaults into the front yard.
No, there's no evidence of what he did.